So today we are doing Caspar David Friedrich, which is a show that's on at the Metropolitan Museum through May 11th, as you can see. Um, Very powerful show. There's 70 works in the show. Well worth seeing. So I'm gonna actually start with a little bio information. Caspar David Friedrich um, was born in 1774, died in 1840, was a German romantic landscape painter, generally considered the most important German artist of his generation. His symbolic and anti-classical work conveys a subjective emotional response to the natural world. Friedrich's paintings often set contemplative human figures silhouetted against the night sky or the morning mists or barren trees or Gothic ruins. Um, the viewer's gaze toward a sort of metaphysical dimension. Friedrich was born in, I'm going to try and pronounce this name, Greifswald on the Baltic Sea in what was at the time a Swedish um, uh, enclave of Germany. He studied in Copenhagen from 1794 to 1798 before settling in Dresden. He came of age during a period across Europe of growing disillusionment with materialistic society and was giving rise to a new appreciation for spirituality. This shift in ideals was often expressed through a reevaluation of the natural world. As artists such as Friedrich, Turner, and Constable sought to depict nature as a divine creation to set against the artifice of human civilization. Friedrich's work brought him renown early in his career. Contemporaries spoke of him as having discovered the tragedy of landscape. His work nevertheless fell from favor during his latter years, and he died in obscurity as Germany moved towards modernization in the late 19th century. A new sense of urgency characterized its art. And Friedrich's contemplative depictions of stillness came to seem like a product of a bygone age. Early in the 20th century, there was a renewed interest in his work. Beginning in 1906, there was an exhibition of 32 of his paintings in Berlin. The work influenced the Expressionist artists, later Surrealists, and Existentialists. The rise of Nazism in the early 30s saw a resurgence in Friedrich's popularity because Friedrich was very much into depicting Germany at the time, which was very fragmented. I'll talk more about this later. But his work was seen as very patriotic, and so that may be one of the reasons why we haven't heard from him, because basically, if he was identified with as a hero of the Nazis, that would tend to uh, push him to the background of most cultivated societies. Um, but there is now a resurgence in 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 appreciation of who he was. And one other thing to say about the Nazis is basically Friedrich would have been the last one to love them, because he was very much into um, espousing the individual um, self um, acknowledgement, self um, realization, and would not have been a good Nazi. That's for damn sure. Okay, so he was raised. He was born basically into a middle class family. Uh, though his mother died when he was 8, and his 2 sisters also died, so there was a lot of death in his early um, youth, which really affected him throughout his life. There was definitely a melancholia that followed him through most of his life. The other thing which happened, which was very tragic, is um, he was ice skating and got into some kind of trouble, and his brother tried to come to his assistance and fell through the ice and died. And Friedrich witnessed that whole thing. So little Caspar had quite a weight to carry. Okay, so we're going to move on now. This is the quintessential painting of the Romantic period and Caspar David Friedrich's most famous work. Romanticism was an artistic and intellectual movement that originated in Europe toward the end of the 18th century. The purpose of the movement was to advocate for the importance of subjectivity, imagination, and the appreciation of nature in society and culture in response to the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Romanticists rejected the social conventions of the time in favor of a moral outlook known as individualism. They argued that passion and intuition are crucial to understanding the world, and that beauty is more than merely an affair of form, but rather something that evokes a strong emotional response. And I did this little sketch up here. Basically, um, Friedrich used a lot of symmetry in his work, and basically the center focus. You'll see it a lot if you're sensitive to it in the work that I show you as we move along. So he was very much into the golden mean and that whole notion of classical construction of a composition, although he threw out many of the conventions. So um, you see the seeds of the individual self-expression of romanticism, from romanticism to expressionism to surrealism to existentialism. This compositional device uh, of turning the figure away from the viewer um, is something which raises a lot of questions. It actually is very provocative. I mean, we want to know something about what's going on here. Who is this person? Are are we identifying with him, or are we watching his experience? I see a couple of questions up here. Let's see. Ah, uh, yeah, we've now changed the intro from the intro slide. Um, okay, okay. So, all right. So I appreciate your questions. They're helpful. It just I'll stop every now and then to check and see what's going on. Um, so uh, we observe him in this quiet moment of contemplation. Friedrich's relationship to nature, the um, the concept of the sublime is a quality of greatness. Um, in this case, literally elevated a sense of awe before nature. Um, and at times it's terrifying. I mean, this guy is standing high up on this cliff. It's a precipice. It's exciting, inspiring, and 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 terrifying at the same time. Okay. Originally part of a bound sketchbook, this sheet demonstrates Friedrich's early method of making nature studies. After after losing the loosely drawing the contours of the plant in pencil, he went over the sketch with pen and ink, refining and shaping each stem and leaf. He then worked up the central image with the brush and wash to suggest the play of light and shadow across the plant's undulating surface. Working outdoors with no other artist tools than at hand, he used the upper corner of the sheet to test his brush to ensure that he had the right dilutions of ink for the areas of shading. So these beautiful drawings, just exquisite and very, very refined tonal sensibility, um, were what he made his bones on. Basically, the first, he didn't paint until he was about 33. So he actually was well known for these ink and wash drawings, and he did all this stuff plein air. He worked directly out in nature, so he was gathering this information and many drawings. And when he went into the studio, see, this was the other thing that I'm going to say is basically this is before paint tubes were invented. Paint tubes were not invented until the 1840s, I believe. Um, so pen and ink and watercolor were things which artists would go out into nature to gather information and work with. So he actually marketed these and did very well. Oh, okay. So he was 33 or 34, um, and he did much of his work in the studio. So basically, what he would do is take these drawings, and that's one on the right over here at the bottom. Um, that gives you some idea. It's very similar composition to what the painting is about. So he would basically have to grind his pigments and all that in the studio. You couldn't really take those out unless you put them in a pig's bladder or something like that. Very awkward. So basically, this piece is one of his first oil paintings. And you see very, very much detail oriented. And he was putting this together from his drawings. Incredibly detailed. Oh. Morning mist in the mountains. So this quiet, very subtle approach to nature is something that you'll see again and again in his work. Okay. So Friedrich lived in a time of political turmoil. Basically, the Napoleonic Wars were going on in the 1700s, 1800s. That I don't know the exact dates of the Napoleonic Wars, but this piece that you're seeing is a French soldier wandering off into these woods. Um, the other thing that in the historic context is important to understand is that Germany was not a country at that time. It was principalities. It was a group of smaller regions that were ruled over by different royal leaders and coming together to do something like fight against the French was one of the few things that kind of drew together these kind of wavering, competing forces. Um, and Friedrich had high hopes that the country would come together after the war was over, but that was not to be at that time. Um, but I did this detail over here of him kind of wandering off into the woods, and notice how he's kind of dragging the saber behind him. Um, and on this tree stump, there's this um, blackbird or crow staring at him. Okay, uh, here we go. Here's a portrait of Friedrich in his studio, and you see how he used this thing called a maul stick to steady his hand to paint those incredible details that he worked with in his paintings. Okay. Among Friedrich's first major works, um, the 1808 painting marked an important break with conventions of landscape painting by including Christian iconography. In the hierarchy of genres, religious historical paintings were considered the highest genre of art. Friedrich's use of landscape to evoke spiritual message was thus quite controversial. Landscape had been considered more of a background setting rather than the symbol of an emotive force. So you see the actual altar setting on on the far right. And again, you see that triangle business in the composition. The symmetry thing is very much part of what goes on here. The transformation or transmigration of the Christian symbolism into natural settings is beginning in these pieces. He's still holding on to this Christian iconography, but setting them in the woods, setting them in the forest. Um, and his relationship to nature, to that the vitality of the natural world is something that becomes more and more pronounced and important to him as the work goes on. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. And the abbey, the ruins of the Gothic cathedral. It's kind of hard to make out here, but at the bottom there's a procession of monks carrying a coffin. Um, they're carrying a casket into the abbey. This sense of loss, of transition into the darkness at twilight. Um, these kind of gnarled, half-dead oaks. He knew how to set a mood. So there's this business of twilight as kind of the entry into the spiritual realm. Um, okay. Much of my life has ebbed away before this shivering expanse to the sound of waves in storm and calm and the claws of the surf. Samuel Beckett. So Friedrich's range, reaching across the centuries, is still being felt. Um, Beckett felt a real affinity to the moody kind of existential aspect of Friedrich's work. And I did a blow up of the monk, and you really can't see, much. Again, it's facing out into the night, facing out into the darkness. This painting actually was X-rayed, and he had painted a number of ships on the horizon and in the water, and he ended up over time painting those out. Now this was started in 1808 and finished in 1810, so he worked on this painting for over 2 years. It's fairly big too. It's 43 by 67 is a fairly decent sized piece for him. Um, very evocative, very um, uh, soft but dark and rich. Let's go on to this next. Okay, so the intent and the somber, luminous voids really kind of speak to each other between Rothko and Friedrich. Um, Close to a century and a half apart, Rothko's abstractions have this kind of somber, luminous void, they speak to each other, kind of suspended in time. Oh, okay. And here, there's this kind of static expanse of of a dematerialized, luminous presence that show profound kinship to Friedrich. Friedrich's Friedrich especially explored the awe-inspiring effects of the natural landscape on the human viewer, examining how subjective experience affects perception. As he wrote, the artist should paint not only what he sees before him, but also what he sees within him. So if you look at these beautiful, tiny pieces, they're very small, but 8 by 11, um, 8 by 10. Um, I also I also see some Edward Hopper in here too. I mean, basically that that evening piece could be on Cape Cod. Okay. And the other great romantic artist of light and color is Turner. Um, these fellows were both absorbed in the transcendence of natural phenomena. They're not the observations of the Impressionists. The light in Turner is all motion, it's emotion. And this light is kind of an angelic presence. And he's even both both Turner and Friedrich painted angels in the glowing skies. Not in this particular painting, but there's there's this business of a historic reference, but also the the luminous presence of that of nature, timelessness. In 1818, um, Friedrich married, um, and he found the old curmudgeon found some kind of joy in his life. Um, they had 3 children together, and that actually some of Caspar's friends were surprised that he married, um, but there we go. So these are earlier self-portraits, you know, one from 1800, one from 1810, and this is his wife modeling in the window. And I'll talk more about this painting as we go along here. Ah, whoop. Okay. All right. Um, Woman at the window. Um, yeah. What are we looking at? He's looking out the window at, you see the sailboats, the masts. Um, uh, she's lost in thought, longing. Um, One of the things that I love and appreciate about Friedrich is he poses a lot of questions but doesn't give us a lot of answers. So we're left to figure that out. Um, Gerhard Richter, who is still alive and painting, um, really loved Friedrich and loved that aspect of Friedrich, that question, that unanswered question, um, and and he painted this painting of his daughter Betty in 1988. Okay, Woman Before the Rising or Setting Sun. Again, his wife, the model. So 1818 when they married, 1824. Took a while to work this painting out, and it's a small painting. It's only 9 by 12. And then I put in a monk. Basically, this whole motif of of um, the the subjects turned away from us, and us, left to fill in the blanks about the narrative of what's going on here and what the relationship is. Um, in this Woman Before the Rising or Setting Sun, it really, um, for me, it, it's a longing for merging with nature, again. Um, that sense of the gesture, the opening to that vision that she's seeing. Okay, and um, Cliffs of Rugen. This was 1818. They're on their honeymoon on the island of Rogan, um, and he is the figure standing on the right. She, the figure seated on the left, and maybe a nephew that's in the middle. We don't know for sure, but this is a really beautiful, light-filled painting, and you can imagine that this is something very different for Friedrich's moody uh, tone. Um, Very beautiful piece, and I'm going to move to here so you can see a little bit of a closer detail. Um, Again, oh, sorry, we don't know what's going on here. I mean, basically, there's these little sailboats down there that she's pointing at something. Um, it's really kind of a lot of questions we don't have the answers for. We can't see what's going on down there. Okay. Smoke rises from the chimneys of the houses nestled among the trees, adding to adding a domestic note to the landscape. Atop the rise, at the center, is a pergola flying a tiny flag, which may be a guide to approaching ships. A handful of boats, perceptibly by the white edges of their you can see them by the edges of their sails. Um, the color on the pendant um, connects the scene to the Baltic city of Rostock, a center of maritime activity in Friedrich's home region. So there's a little bit of a hot flash on this because I took it at the exhibition. Ah, okay, these guys. So these appear to be very contemporary images. I can imagine Lois Dodd painting these paintings. Um, it, they're paintings about nothing, but when you see them in person, there's Every needle on the pine tree is painted. These paintings vibrate with the presence of mind. If you try and follow your way through those branches, you see them overlapping and intertwining with each other. Very complex. Um, it's a tiny painting. Again, it's 12 by 10, but really beautifully painted, really exquisite detail. Um, they're very detailed, but they're not um, tight. There's a presence to the brushwork. And again, the history in the ruins of the architecture. Um, it's kind of an archaeological um, or archetypal recording of the landscape. Um, and he did tons of these beautiful, beautiful things. And they have a lot of them in the show. Small, small, but really exquisite. Okay. Again, this sense of longing, of anticipation, the returning ships, the quiet sea. The figures are at peace on this giant boulder. It kind of, grounds this composition. And again, there's their dead center. Um, Beautiful color. Um, in person, the green sea is much greener, much brighter. Um, okay. Friedrich exemplifies the Romantic movement's pursuit of spiritual and emotional communion with the natural world. He prioritizes authenticity and self expression over the imitation of Renaissance masters. I see everywhere the tiresome attempt to imitate old masters' paintings and engravings. He complained around 1830. And it was through nature that he and his peers believed humankind might come into contact with the infinite and the divine. Nature, how oft you must yield to fashion and subject yourself to human rules. In place of traditional religious motifs, Friedrich painted environments that address universal themes through deeply personal symbolic language. And again, with the environmental issues that we're dealing with today, these paintings seem very poignant to me. They really have a relevance 150 years later. Oh, amen. Beckett wrote in his diary, apropos of this version of two men contemplating the moon, um, in that city, pleasant predilection for two tiny, languid men in his landscape. Years later, Beckett told a journalist that the composition was the inspiration for his play, Waiting for Godot. And here's the set for Waiting for Godot. So Friedrich's reach is quite evident here. Oh, okay. Now, the the transcendentalist kind of romantic movement had its exponents in America. Of course, Innes, not quite so melancholy um, as his Germanic forebearer Friedrich. But again, there's Emerson, there's a whole tonalist movement that was really about this kind of unity or search for the, the the spiritual presence in landscape. Okay. Friedrich's works are world famous and immensely popular while being anything but feel good art. For all their captivating beauty, they remain challenging and palpably radical. Bright, almost garish colors meet clear, pared down compositions. They combine the fantastic and the austere, sadness and hope, subjectivity and universality, precision and openness. Friedrich's works don't give answers, they open up spaces for searching questions. As naturalistic as this piece appears, there's a surreal, dreamlike stillness here. Okay, and here's Neil Welliver, um, wonderful landscape painter. The wetlands of Maine were a fit and in tune here. Ah, the shipwreck. The sea of ice suggests the idea that nature will always be superior to man. Ice is the place of death, and nature will always defeat anyone who tries to intrude on it. Friedrich's traumatic experience with his brother, um, who fell through the ice on a body of water and died. It's rumored that Friedrich might have forced his brother to go onto the ice, or his brother was trying to save Caspar. Some scholars have speculated that Friedrich's experience could have influenced this painting. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that it did, but okay. Uh, there's a theory also that Friedrich painted this piece as a commentary on Germany, just as the ship is frozen in ice. Germany is considered to be a frozen wasteland politically, with no hope for improvement. So you see the burst apart ship in the center of all these ice shards. Really interesting piece. So there's in a lot of these paintings, there's this spiritual thing, but there's also these political messages. He was a very liberal guy and basically hoped for greater unity. Oh, okay. Oh, uh, and speaking of ice, I threw in Frederick Church, which basically did a bunch of these iceberg paintings, and Bierstadt. Again, the sense of awe of the search for the sublime, but these pieces, for me, lack the emotional intensity of Friedrich. Uh, okay, and this piece on the right is just that sky is really incredibly painted. Just the subtle gradients in it are remarkable. Um, and this is stages of life. So you look at the five people on the shoreline, and you see them at various stages, and then there's also five ships coming in. Um, the The one interesting part about this one, which gets a little on the surrealist side, is noticing this giant ship in the center. It's pretty damn close to shore, and it's fully rigged, coming straight at us. What's going to happen there? Well, anyway, I don't think that was a question that he was asking when he painted it. The rigging itself, those shapes of the sails, are really beautiful um, against that sky. Ah, these suspended rocks. I saw these things and it's kind of like a ritual spot that he found. Um, and I thought immediately of Andy Goldsworthy's outdoor installation pieces. Uh, I don't think I'm not sure that Andy Goldsworthy saw this piece and thought this was an interesting idea, but okay, all right. And again, Friedrich and Richter both the love the unanswered questions. Basically, um, Gerhard Richter, a contemporary artist, very tongue in cheek with these romantic landscapes, um, but at the same time they're beautifully painted and quite in keeping with Friedrich. There's those German roots. Beautiful, gorgeous uh, piece by Friedrich on the left. Okay, and Caspar David Friedrich, Soul of Nature, is at the Met until May 11th. Um, it there If you go to the Met website, there's a bunch of lectures that are there that you can find when you go to the exhibition site. Um, there are also a bunch of YouTubes on him that I found really interesting. There are a few hour and a half long talks on Friedrich. If any of you are interested, there you go. Uh, so I will see you in 2 weeks, unless there's any questions, which I will check and see. How does he paint the light in the landscapes without photos to refer to? The light changes in minutes. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, um, Edward Hopper never painted his landscapes, his oil paintings out in nature. He painted all those things in the studio. So this is not out of keeping. Um, what he did was he brought back those wonderful detailed drawings that he did, and he did watercolors also, and he just remembered it. It was just part of um, the process for him. So, good question. Okay, see you all in 2 weeks.